Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast. And today we are on episode number
55.
take it away. 55. And that is a round number. I like it. It has a nice ring to it.
Yep, 55. Always good. And as we're recording this, we're in the middle of July in an ever-changing market and creating new challenges and new opportunities. So I think that's what we're going to focus on in our discussions today. So I don't know, got any of your agents working these days? Everybody on holidays? Everybody's shutting it down for a while like usual in the summer? Or do you have some that are, this is an opportunity for me right now while others are on vacation? I'm gonna hit the pavement, so to speak.
Well, summertime is always historically a challenging time for the real estate market. The market is always cyclical, right? And moves in cycles. And during the summer months, a lot of the top realtors are away on vacation. They're enjoying their cottages. And so are customers. People are out enjoying the summertime. The summer is short in Canada, and people like to take full advantage. So historically, things always slow down in the summer months, and the market is returning more to a normalized state after COVID, because the whole cycle really changed during COVID, right? During COVID, when COVID first hit, everything stopped. We had to lay off a lot of our staff, and the cycle changed. For the first time when things opened up, throughout the whole summer, we were really busy because people were catching up on, all those transactions that they normally would have done in the spring market. It shifted. But I feel like we're more into our regular cycle. People are out there, they're enjoying the summer, they're enjoying the weather, and the market is shifting. It is slowing down from that high that we had in 2021 and even in 2020. Both those summers were extremely busy, lots of transactions. I'm sure your office was really busy closing deals as well. But now in 2022, we're a little bit back to the regular cycle of what usually happens in the summertime. And of course, today being July the 13th, when we're recording this podcast, usually we don't really talk about dates because, we want the podcast to be really relevant for weeks and months ahead. But today's an important day because the Bank of Canada is set to roll out their interest rate announcement. And the consensus in the industry is that we're going to see a 0.75% increase in rates. So that added with the fact that we are in the summer months, we're going to see a slowdown in activity. I think buyers are going to really take more time to make purchasing decisions. And I think we're going to see a lot more sellers rush to the market to see what kind of prices they can get for their homes. And we're seeing it throughout the brokerage. I am signing a much higher level of suspensions for listings and cancellations where, those expectations are not being met by the market, and certain sellers are choosing to hold off on selling their property. They don't want to accept the market prices that their home is obtaining in this market, and they're holding off and they're not selling. So we're definitely seeing, a slowdown in the activity, which is typical for this time period.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a shift in the marketplace, and it's a shift in the mentality that potential sellers are having to come to grips with right now, because some people that thought, beginning of 2022 that, okay, maybe in the spring and the summer, the fall, we're going to look to sell our property, and they're watching what's going on in the early months, and we're coming up period of people getting multi-offer bids, and it was never difficult to sell a property. And it was like, put it on the market. We're going to have more than one offer. It's just a question of what price you're going to get, and let's pick a closing date. And that's all the agents were negotiating. It's like trying to figure out what the competition is, and it's not just figuring out what the fair market price for the property is, but how much are we going to have to pay to get this property, or pay above what we think the fair market price is in order to get this property. So that's gone right now. Like that's completely gone. So now we're back to an agent having to, do their homework differently, diligently, to figure out what's a fair price for this home. Like what in a normal market, what should this house be going for? You might only get one offer. It might take you a long time to get an offer, but what's the real price? What's the real value of that home today? And forget about, oh, it's worth $1 million. Let's list it for 9. No, if it's worth $1 million, you probably have to list it for $1 million right now because that's the price you really want. And you hope that you get one person that's going to pay that or make an offer. And it might be close to it. And then you got to negotiate to get that up. So a very different mindset. And you got to get sellers into a different mindset to accept that. They're not going to hit a home run and they're not going to get 100 or 200,000 over the value of their home. Those days are gone, right? They've got to make a shift. And from your point of view, from the agents have to have those discussions with the seller to convince them, no, what our efforts are to get fair market value for your house and sell it in a reasonable time period.
Yeah, the conversations are definitely changing, David. And I mean, the one thing that COVID brought to our industry is they brought a lot of new realtors, right? A lot of people during COVID. And I give people a lot of credit. It's a great use of your time. A lot of people were thinking about making a career move. A lot of people were thinking about obtaining their real estate license. And I think we had a record number of people that went through the licensing program and got into the industry. But those new agents have never really sat down and negotiate an offer face to face and went back and forth and really learned the art of negotiation, because it was a completely different environment that they were experiencing for the last 2 years. And now that there's a big shift, a lot of them don't even know what a condition is in an offer, because no conditions were acceptable to the sellers over the last 2.5 years in the environment that we had in real estate. Now we're seeing things change, and we're seeing things change in a really big light. And as industry professionals, we also have to adapt to those changes. We have to learn about conditions. We have to learn about negotiating conditions, and working together to really put the deal together. And that's the most important, right? It's much more important that the deal closes, right, the purchase price that you get, right? Because if you're selling a house and you receive an offer, and maybe you receive a second offer, and if you choose the highest offer, but that buyer come closing date doesn't have the ability to close because the house doesn't appraise at the price that they paid, or a financial situation changes, then are you really better off? And did you do your seller justice by having a knee-jerk reaction and accepting that highest offer? Was that the best decision for your seller? And the clear answer is absolutely not.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And that's the other thing that's really affecting the market right now is, even when there are firm transactions that have been agreed to by parties, we're running into, file after file in our office where one party can't close, or they can't close on time because they can't get the financing. And like you said, there'll be another interest rate hike today, and that's going to, add fuel to that fire right now. And it's become a real issue. So like, in our office, I could tell you, we've talked about it in previous podcasts, the summer months generally busy for us because all the hard work that the agents were doing in April, May, June, getting things under contract for closings. And a lot of the closings come up during July and August. So we're typically quite busy in July and August. And we are right now, not as busy this July as we were a year ago, but still pretty busy. And the same thing for August. But we're having to spend and work harder on every single transaction than what we would normally be doing, because there are so many of them that we're getting closer to the closing date. And if we're selling, the buyers, lawyers contacting us say, hey, we don't have a firm mortgage commitment yet, or they want to do a second appraisal and they're not giving us the funds. We got to scramble for additional funds because the appraised value on the second appraisal is not as high as the first, and they're not advancing as much money. We got an issue. So And we're on both sides of these things. So we certainly have sympathy for, when we're on the seller side, when we have a buyer that's in a bit of trouble and can't close on time, because we're on the buyer side of these things too. So what it's doing in our firm, it's creating a lot of anxiety to our clerks and our lawyers and everybody to help our clients through the process. And even on transactions where we have no indication that there's going to be an issue, we're getting calls from the clients saying, we're reading the papers, we're seeing what's going on online, we're hearing all the stories, what if our buyer can't close? And we're really nervous about it and we're very anxious. So tell us what could happen. And then we got to spend the time to go through with everybody, like what all the worst case scenarios potentially could be, and what happens if they don't close, and what does it mean to to go to litigation on these things, or to mitigate your damages, and all these concepts, which in the normal course, I don't want to talk to any client about that. I don't want to worry. No, we're going to close your deal on time. If we have a problem, we'll let you know, but we don't want to have those conversations with everybody, because it's not healthy. It's when we need to have those conversations, we'll have them. So it's creating a lot of anxiety, even internally amongst the lawyers in our firm and the clerks in our firm, because they spend so much time on these files. So we always talk about things as business owners, how we have to deal with these things. It's hard. Like these things are hard. We have to keep encouraging everybody, and we got to spend the time. And if we're spending time doing this, we've got to charge additional fees in a lot of cases for the time that we're spending on these files. It's not just we quote a fee for here's what it costs to close the transaction, the normal course. But if this isn't the normal course and you got to spend this time, there's additional fees involved for the time.
Yeah.
So it's an unusual time.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you, David. Closing the transaction is the number one priority for everybody involved, right? And we talk about fiduciary duties to clients, right? But we very seldom talk about the co-op or the buyer and the co-op agent, right? And I think we need to talk about this because it's really important. If you're representing a buyer in a transaction, you have fiduciary duties to that buyer. You have to protect them at all costs. And yes, I know that buying a house is very important because you're going to get paid your commission, but ensuring that your buyer understands every step of the process, understands the financing requirement, and more importantly, qualifies for the financing.
Right.
In this market, why would you ever take that liability on your shoulders and put in a firm offer to win a competing bid and possibly place your buyer in a really negative situation? And then, you have people, good people, because David, you have amazing staff who are constantly worried whether that deal is going to close, whether, and listen, we talk about it for, the consequences of what they look at, like if, a buyer breaches contract, but the consequences and the costs are so dire in those situations. And a lot of the times, we see this happening as well in the industry where, the realtor wants to get the deal, and they place their buyers in a really awkward and negative situation, right? Now, a lot of times my brokerage is on the other side of those transactions, but they're not comfortable transactions to be a part of. So if you're representing a buyer in this market, it's so important that you put in that financing condition, you articulate well, you present that position, right? And just because you're putting in a financing condition does not mean that your client is weak when it comes to the financial aspect and the ability to close the transaction. All that means is that you're doing extra due diligence and you're actually protecting the seller, right? A lot of the times to ensure that come closing date, that property is going to close, right?
Right.
I always say that mortgage qualification is a two-step process. First, you qualify the individual, and then you have to qualify the property.
Right. Right. And you're right, because they have to look at all the underlying factors from the individual point of view, like where's the source of income, where's the source of down payment, and what's the source of income that's coming in. They look at the employment records and things like that, and they're the T4s. So you're right, they're qualifying that, but then the last piece of the puzzle is how much is the value of the property really worth. So the appraisals are key because, in residential real estate, the lenders are really lending based on the value of the properties. They're looking at if there is a default and I get the property back and have to resell it, is there enough value there, even in a declining market, that I can sell the property and get back all my money, plus all the costs of selling, the real estate commissions, if I have to carry it, if I have to go to court to get an order for possession of the property, if I have to deal with tenants or kick people out, there could be litigation costs, there's insurance costs, there's all those other costs, which property taxes, which are all recoverable by the mortgage lender. But but they have to factor all that in addition to the actual loan that they give to them. It's if I have to sell it, can I get back all my principal? Can I get the outstanding interest? Can I cover all the other costs of selling the property under power of sale? So that's what they're looking at, and that they're mainly focused on. Because then if there's a shortfall after that, okay, then I'm going to chase the borrower on a personal level to see if I can recover any shortfall. But it's not often that's the result, because they're lending on a conservative enough basis that their recovery is going to be from the real estate itself, because they don't want to chase a borrower beyond that. They do a lot of times, they get judgments against them and it's hard to collect on them, and they'll start garnish some wages and stuff to make up the shortfall. But they want the real estate. That's what they're really focused on. So that's why they're doing these second appraisals, because they're trying to figure out what's the real value of the property. And it's not just the value today, it's the value if I got to resell this property 6 months or a year from now.
Under duress, under
power of sale, right?
Yep.
So that's what the homework they're doing, and that's what's creating, these very conservative loan values that they're putting out. So now you talk about agents having to do a proper fiduciary job for a buyer in this market. How about agents trying to do both ends of a deal? Okay. I understand everybody's trying to make a living and trying to do it, and sometimes they end up being on both sides. It's very attractive to try and be on both sides, but it's really different. You're on both sides in a market when things are closing and you don't have issues. But right now, on so many transactions, there's so many issues, and you got to be involved as an agent to help buyers and sellers get through these issues. And you can't, and if you have a fiduciary obligation to both the buyer and the seller, because you're on both ends, now what are you going to do? Like, you're stuck. Okay. Because anything you have to disclose to one side or the other. And you're going to be of very little value in trying to work the parties through that process.
Well, let's discuss a particular scenario. So let's say you are in a multiple offer situation, and a buyer comes to you and wants to present an offer on your listing. Now, do you encourage a condition on financing and home inspection?
Yeah.
Right? Those are conflicting ideologies, right?
Completely.
Because you want to protect the buyer, right? But at the same time, the seller wants a clean offer and doesn't
Right.
want to negotiate and wants to know that the deal is done.
Right.
But then if you do present, a clean offer with no conditions, come closing time and the buyer is not able to close, can the buyer point the finger back at you and say, well, you put me in this situation because you advised me to present an offer with no conditions?
Right.
And can the seller then point a finger at you and say, well, you know what, you probably should have put a condition, because we could have found out at the very beginning that this buyer had financial problems and not waited 3 months to find out at closing that they can't close, right? So, you have conflicting viewpoints there. And it's really hard to navigate. And I think it's even harder in a shifting market. But I think the right choice to make is put those conditions in, go through the process, make sure that the buyer, does a great home inspection, they're satisfied with the condition of the property, make sure that, they have a firm commitment from a mortgage lender, and they go through the whole 5-day finance condition on financing, and make sure that part of that financing commitment letter, that appraisal is done. Right. I know it's difficult, and time is short. 4 or 5 days is not a lot of time, but a lot of the times the lenders can do an appraisal And then at least as a professional, you've exhausted all your options. You've protected both sides. You've protected the seller and you've protected the buyer.
Right. And we know that if a deal does go off the rails, what are the buyers and the sellers going to do? They're going to look for someone to blame.
Of course.
And the first person they're going to look at is the agents that's giving them advice. And if it's the same agent on both sides, and they didn't do a proper job of wearing the hat as buyer's agent and then wearing the hat as seller's agent and addressing it from both points of view and disclosing everything, then you're putting yourself right in the line of fire. And why do that? Just to try and grab a little extra commission. It's not really worth it. Like and the same thing at our end. Like, we don't want to be on both sides of transactions. Unless it's really family members, that are involved, and to that type of a transfer. Because even though we can use different lawyers within our firm and do things that way, it's just generally not a good idea. But for a couple of years, when you're in a market like we talked about, when some of these young agents have grown up in a market where there haven't been issues about closing, it was just about negotiating a purchase price and the highest bidder wins, or close to highest bidder wins, and you move to closing, and it's like, okay, well, if I'm on both sides of this, like, no big deal, because everybody's motivated, it's just going to close. So if it closes and you get lucky, like, who knows the difference? We're not in that market anymore. Now you got to be worried about these things. You got to think about these things and think about those risks to you as an agent. And David, you're 100% right. Your duty is not to yourself and how much commission I'm going to earn on this transaction. Your duty, when you take on representation, your duty is to the client. If you're to the buyer representation or a seller representation, that's your job. And if you do your job properly, you'll get paid. If it doesn't close, you don't get paid. And if it doesn't close, not only do you not get paid, but you might be party to a lawsuit between the parties because you didn't give them proper advice and guide them through it. And you didn't meet the test of what would a reasonable agent have done in the circumstances if you were acting for just one of them, right? If you don't meet that, then all of a sudden you're putting yourself in line of fire, like, just to grab an extra, commission on it. So just be really careful about any temptation to do it, especially in this type of a market.
Yeah, that's great advice. And David, I think it all comes down to communication and negotiation, right? I would like to see agents get back to the old way of doing things. Sit down at the table in front of the seller, and have a discussion. Tell the seller about your buyer. Explain to them why this condition of financing is in the offer. Explain to them how it protects them as the seller. Explain to them that, if you guys do this now and you eliminate the issues before they arise, and the buyer walks into this knowing all the variables, that the chances of closing and this coming to a successful completion at the time of closing are extremely, extremely high.
Yeah.
And have that conversation. And maybe bring that mortgage pre-approval letter, maybe bring some supporting documents that will make the seller feel more comfortable in accepting that condition, and explain to them why they should and why it protects them, why it's in their benefit, right? A lot of the times, the listing agent will say, well, look for a clean offer, and that buyer knows what they're getting into, knows their financial position, but that's not always the best solution to protect everybody's interests and ensure a smooth closing at the end of the day. Sometimes doing the diligence up front and going through that whole process up front, especially in a shifting market, is the smarter alternative, right? But I think getting back to the old ways of doing things and really communicating and negotiating and explaining that position to all parties is so important right now. And agents are not doing it enough. They're relying on electronic signing abilities. They're relying on email. They're emailing offers, and they're losing that personal touch. Sabia Ali, our broker of record, she always uses this term that real estate is a belly to belly business. And I laugh at her. I'm like, belly to belly. It's like, it just paints that picture in your mind. But she's absolutely right. It's an emotional transaction. It's the largest transaction of people's lives. and it's very people and relationship and emotionally driven, and you have to embrace that. And the
Right.
agents that do, they flourish, right? They
Right.
talk to people on a human level. They
Right.
don't just make it about the number. The number is important, but there's so many other aspects of it.
Right. And the art of negotiation, as you say, has been lost to some degree. And technology is to blame for some of it, because if you've grown up in an age where everything is done electronically, everything is done by text, and you aren't having those face-to-face meetings, face-to-face negotiations, and even conversations on a phone as opposed to text message. Like there's nothing beats a face-to-face meeting if you really want to get something negotiated. When you can look someone in the eye and keep a straight face, maybe have a poker face, who knows, but it's different when you're having a conversation face to face with people about getting to really the bottom line of what people want. Okay, now if you can't do that and you're having a phone conversation, that's still way better than having a text conversation if you're really trying to negotiate something, or having just back and forth on emails and sign backs on offers electronically without people actually talking to each other. But it's a lost art because people haven't had to do it. So some in the industry grew up with that and did it for a period of time and have just gotten away from it, but they can draw back on those skills because they used to do it, and they remember what that was like. For some of the younger agents who've only grown up in the last few years, they haven't had to do it. They don't know how to do it, and they have to learn, and they should be listening to this and paying attention when I tell them, or you tell them, that you've got to think about how you acquire those skills and attend sessions and practice that, and go with some old veteran who's done it before and see how they do it, because those are really, really important skills to learn. And we talk about this with our lawyers as well, because I've got the same thing in my industry. I've got young lawyers who've grown up and not had to do that. They've never gone to a meeting to negotiate with another lawyer with the clients in the room, because it's just not done. And COVID certainly prevented that from being done for a couple of years too. So there's a whole skill set that people are going to have to relearn, but as agents, as lawyers and things, because you get a way better result when you talk face to face and can look someone in the eye, or even talk face to face on a Zoom call like this. Like, that's, if you can't be in person, you can still see someone and see their facial expression, see their tone. Completely different than reading it as a text or an email. So, I encourage, lawyers to do it. I encourage agents, they have to do it. They're going to have to do it to achieve the success that they want to achieve, because the market's changed. New skill sets are required to get deals done right now.
Yeah, and David, just to put things into perspective, a lot of the times, just to get a meeting with the seller when you have a signed offer is nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody, has this sort of comfort hat on and is hiding behind the technology, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to take a few minutes and give the agents out there a pointer of how do you actually get in front of the seller if you have a signed offer by the buyer. Okay. And the best thing to do is you register the offer with the office, with the listing office. You call the listing agent and you say to them, look, congratulations, I have an offer and I want to present it in person. Now, you're probably going to be told, no, please email me the offer, send it to me. You're going to be, given 100 different excuses, but this is where you need to hold your ground. And you just need to say politely, look, I've been instructed by my buyer to come and do an old-fashioned in-person presentation. When would you like me to come? This offer is irrevocable, 8 p.m. tonight. I can come anytime before 8. Let me know what time is good. And you hold your ground. And you do not release that offer without an in-person meeting, right? And that's how you get it done. And
Right.
you have to be very polite, very professional about it, and just say, look, I'm just following the instructions of my clients. I've been instructed to do an in-person presentation. I have to follow my client's lawful instruction. I do have a signed offer here. Can't release any of the details until you get me in front of your client. And you just hold your ground. And you might get some adversity from the other side, but ultimately they're gonna set that meeting. And what, in my experience, it's always amazing to see how the attitude changes when the seller is in the room. They're not going to be, they're not going to be combative with you. They're going to be on their best behavior, because ultimately they want to put that deal together as well.
Yeah, and it gives you the opportunity to explain why your offer is fair. It may not be accepted as is. You still might get a sign back or whatever, but at least you get an opportunity to explain why you think it's fair, like why you think the price is fair. Here's the comparables, or whether it's fair, it's close to fair, but this is what my buyer client can afford, and we really love the house, and this is what we can do, and this is why we need this particular closing date. Okay, because here's what's going on. So we have a little bit of flexibility, but we're limited, and this is why. And you get to give explanations in addition to the black and white provisions that are in the agreement of purchase and sale, right? And this is, how much time we need to make sure we get the financing, and this is our timetable for getting an inspection done, or whatever, or this is when we're selling our property, or whatever the explanation is. It gives you that chance to go through it, a bunch of things that aren't technically black and white in the offer, but you get to explain why you think it's fair and why you think it'd be good for the sellers to consider it. Okay, and even if they're going to sign back and not accept certain things, at least they'll be signing it back with that information known. So they might say, okay, well, the offer's at $1 million, but it sounds like the buyer's pretty stretched, and maybe we can't go to $1.1 million with them, but maybe we can go to $1 million, 25,000. Maybe we can push them up a little bit, but I don't think we can push them up really high. Or they really want to, they need a July 31st closing, but August 10th is better for us. Maybe there's a little bit of leeway there, but at least when you sign back, you're doing it with some context as to what might be acceptable, as opposed to, they're asking for the sky, we're going to ask for the moon, and and then try and negotiate that way. So it really changes the dynamic a lot, and it's a lost art. So, but people are going to be forced. Like, you're right, the resistance is going to be there. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want you to come over, send it to us, and we'll take a look at it, and and let you know. But when they're sitting there and they're saying, well, there aren't any other offers coming in, okay, and like, you've said it many times on these podcasts, sometimes your first offer is your best offer, right? And it's the one you should work with. And sometimes it's going to be your only offer. In a market like today, it might be your only offer. It might be your only offer for a long period of time. So try and figure out if you can work with it. Okay, if the parties can really wait. So you're not going to do that with a bunch of signbacks. You got to try and get the parties together. And if you can get them all together, great. But if you can't get them all together, at least if you have the seller's agent and the buyer's agent together in the same room,
yeah,
and have this back and forth real conversation, like, that helps. Not only to help, but it's going to be a necessity in the market, the way the market's going right now.
Yeah, 100%. I want to give the realtors listening, I want to give you guys 2 pro tips of how to do your offer presentations. Okay. So pro tip number 1, before you pull out the offer and give it to the client, resist that at all costs. When you sit down to the table, hold that offer back for just a few minutes and build rapport with the seller. What made you choose this neighborhood? Why did you buy this house? Where did you buy that couch? Oh my God, I love that chandelier. What kind of a flower is that in the backyard? How long have you had that apple tree? Hey, I noticed the Camaro in the garage. I love the color. Anything, just build rapport with the seller. It is absolutely crucial. They need to like you, okay? They will not sell you their house if they don't like you. Well, they might, but you're gonna enjoy the whole process. You're gonna get them on their side. It's gonna be a far different conversation if they like you. So when you sit down to the table for your first offer presentation, I know the gut reaction is to hand over that offer to the listing agent as soon as possible. My pro tip number 1: resist that temptation. Hold that offer back. Sit down at the table, spend the first few minutes building rapport, telling the seller a little bit about yourself, telling them a little bit about the buyers. And only after you've built that rapport, you've told them a little bit about yourself, you've told them a little bit about your buyers, then you maybe lead them into, especially if you're coming in with a really low price, talk to them about that before you give them the offer. Don't let that shock factor get their defense up. Warm them up into it. Say, look, I am representing a new professional couple. These people have worked really hard over the last 3 years to save the down payment. And you know what? I've been working with them for the last 6 months. I showed them Mary's property on the other side of the street, and I showed them John's property. And by the way, I don't know if you knew, but Mary's property actually had a pool, and the lot was a little bit bigger than yours. And John's property had a brand new kitchen. I think they spent like $60,000 on the kitchen. Did you see pictures? Oh, you did. You were at the open house. Amazing. So did you like the kitchen? Yeah, it was a nice kitchen. Did you see their appliances? They had a gas cooktop. It was beautiful. Top of the line. But by the way, just wanted to preface it. I mean, my people are coming in slightly below your expectations just because they really wanted a pool and the wife really wanted a new kitchen. But you know what? I still convinced them to put pen to paper and to come in and to give you the offer. So, I want to talk about the price. It is negotiable. This is our starting point, but I would really appreciate if you worked with my couple. They're an amazing young professional couple. I see them making lots of memories in your house, and I think they're going to do amazing here. They love the school district, blah, 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 blah. Right. So build that rapport. It's so important, and it will do wonders for your ability to put the deal together.
Yeah. And then in that conversation, you're also going to find out a little about the sellers. They're going to offer up some information too, where they're going, what their plan. Are they going into a rental? Are they buying something else? What's their closing date? You might find out a lot of information, right? Yeah. That can be very useful to your negotiation.
Bought a house already 2 months ago, and they're sweating, and the wife is not sleeping because they can't sell their house.
Right.
How are you going to use that information to better?
And we're trying to get this price because we need to have that extra $50,000 because the place we're buying needs a renovation. So we're really counting on that money maybe, right? And then you'd use that because, well, that's part of your discussion too, because, my couple, they love your house, but they also have to put in some money because it needs a renovation of certain things too. But you find out a lot of information because you're actually having a conversation. Yeah. Right. So it's very valuable opportunity to do that. So those are really good tips, about how to do it.
My pro tip number 2, which kind of leads into my second point is, talk to the seller, right? The listing agent. I mean, as important as the listing agent is, when you're in front of the homeowner, communicate with the homeowner. The other aspect here is that the homeowner is not a professional. They don't negotiate for a living. Right. So they're going to have telltale signs that you will never get from the listing agent because, he's dealt with this hundreds of times. He has his poker face. You're not going to be able to read the listing agent as well as you're going to be able to read the homeowners. Right. So when I present an offer, right, I actually ask them questions. Hey, like as soon as they see the price and the listing agent says, so they're offering you $150,000 for your house. Right away, I interrupt. They say, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the price? How do you like that price, $150,000, right? And then you look at them. Is the husband looking at the wife? Is he scratching his beard? Is he leaning forward? Is he leaning backwards? Is he slouching in his seat? Is he on his phone and not even paying attention? These are all telltale signs that will give you so much information. And especially multiple offers, if you can get in front of the seller and ask these questions and look for these tail signs and build rapport, boy, it's going to make a big difference to how many of these situations, how many of these deals you're putting together versus, how many of these deals you're losing and you're not the successful agent. And remember, in the situations that we've had, 40 offers, 30 offers, 20 offers, there's only one successful winner. So the agents that master this and practice these skills and put this into play every day, they're the ones that are, that one successful buyer that buys the property.
Right. So, these are important skills to acquire and learn how to do it. You've got to learn how to negotiate offers differently. It's not just the price and the closing date. It's getting conditions in. It's going through every aspect of it. What has to be fixed up? What's the list of things that the seller's going to do? Or if the seller's not going to do it, then, is that going to affect the price because the buyer's going to have to fix certain things up? What's really cosmetic and what is really of value. Okay. So you've got to know these things and do your homework as an agent to figure out these things as part of the negotiations now. And it wasn't for so long. So you got to refocus on what you're doing. Like, I'm involved in a transaction right now on the buyer side of it. The sellers had the property on the market in June for a while, really, with sort of a low listing price, still expecting to entice multi offers, and it didn't happen, and they didn't get the action they thought they were going to get on it, and they decided to pull it off the market, and they were going to basically wait till September and then try again. But a couple really was interested in this property, and with their agent, they went to them and they said, look, we did our homework. We know you listed it for X dollars, but we think the real value is Y dollars, and that's the real fair market. Our clients are prepared to give that to you. So you really get, what you should get, and you got no offers right now anyway, but this is really the value. We're not trying to lowball, but here's why we think this is the real value. We'll give that to you, but in exchange, we need they haven't sold yet. We need a long closing. So we'll give you the price you want, but we need a longer closing to give us opportunity. We still need inspection because it's an old house. We still need inspection. So we need a window for that. We need a window for, for financing, just to make sure we get a lender to give a proper appraisal done and make sure the money's going to be there. So we're not going to have an issue on closing, addressing the fact of what's going on in the market right now with appraisal. So give us time to have a real one. So we know when we waive it, for sure we're going to be able to close. And we need a condition. It's conditional upon the sale of the buyer's property. Now, when was the last time you saw one of those? Okay.
Honestly, David, in my 14-year career, I have never, actually, I think I accepted a condition of sales property once where I was controlling both ends of the transaction. So I actually double-ended it. But that is the only situation where I actually dealt with a condition on the sale of property.
Right.
The reason I was comfortable doing that condition is because I knew both parties, and it actually gave me more control of the situation, right? Because I was also the listing agent on the buyer's home.
Yep.
So I could control price, I could control motivation, and I knew I could drive the transaction to completion. So
Right.
I felt confident doing it that way, but it's very rare. Right. And
Yep.
I mean, it poses a lot of issues and a lot of problems. But, in this market, it might be the solution to actually move the property and to get people feeling comfortable and
Right.
ensuring that, the property can come to a close because the buyer has now successfully completed their transaction and everything is kind of moving along. So, it's not a great situation, but I mean it's an option to move the deal along and to get the deal done.
Right. Well, most people advising people right now are saying sell first before you buy, right? And then a lot of people are doing that, and then they have nothing to buy, but they protect themselves. But now they got nothing to buy, and now the closing dates come up, and they got nowhere to go. And they're looking for rentals, they're looking to move in with relatives because there's not enough in the market. So that creates certain issues too. So I think we're going to start seeing more of that, where you're going to give them a window to, that'll be conditional upon the sale of your property too. So you can get a buyer to buy first and sell later. So in this particular fact situation, it was like, the agent did a great job convincing the sellers to consider this in the first place. And on the basis, like, you were going to pull this off until September anyways. So we can deal with all this over the next couple weeks. Like, the buyers are going to get their property on the market, within a week from now. So we don't need it conditional until the long closing, but we need conditional for a period of time to give us a chance to do it. And if we can't do it within that time period, and this whole thing falls apart, you're back to September, and you can go and do what you were going to do anyways. But in the meantime, you have a chance to sell it at a price that you really want to get, that you would still hope to get in September. But there's a real good chance this can all work, and got these conditions in this. We got condition on financing, condition on inspection, condition on sale of the property, all in there, and they're working through that. And I think they've waived they've now, I think, waived the inspection condition and the financing condition. So now we're up to, the buyer's property is up on the market. So hopefully they're able to sell over the next few weeks and they can waive that condition too. And if they can't, then we're back to September and the sellers lost nothing, other than some time, but this might all work out. So I give, big kudos to an agent for going through and finding a way to get this deal done. But you can't do it unless you really get to the seller and the seller's agent and say, hey, like here's the plan, and here's why it could work for the seller, and here's why we got a qualified buyer that can buy your house at a fair price. But here's what we have to do to get there. So let's work together and figure this out. So we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, and again, that's a situation where if you sit down in front of the seller and have a conversation face to face, qualify the buyer, get them to understand what the hesitation is, get them to understand the pain points, and get all parties in the same wavelength working together through the issue, that's when you're going to have success putting these types of transactions together. And that's where you're going to have a lot more success moving forward. Because I think, David, you're absolutely right. I think we're going to see a lot more conditional deals moving forward. We're going to have to see a lot more realtors working together, putting their heads together to make these deals happen. And I think the best way to do that is at the kitchen table, where all parties are sitting facing each other, talking, communicating, and working together to put the deal together.
Yeah, and because we're going to be working with conditional offers, so it's not as black and white as, the condition is expiring, but we still have an issue with the inspection, or we got to go back, or we don't have the financing quite approved yet. There's still some underwriting but we're out of time, or the property hasn't sold. If you had that condition in there too, that the buyer's property hasn't sold yet. So sometimes it's going to require a further negotiation, as opposed to saying, oh, conditions up today, we're either waiving or not waiving, or we can't waive, so deal's off. You have to go back and sometimes try and renegotiate for an extension of the condition, or a modification of a condition, or something else. So when you've already built that relationship and that trust in the process, at least you have someone to talk to. And it's, as opposed to it being, today's the deadline, 5 p.m. Sorry, we can't buy your house because we ran out of time, couldn't get that condition waived. No, like sometimes you need a further negotiation with them and say, here, and talk frankly, here's what's going on. Here's what we got to so far, but we still need a couple more days. So it's still better for everybody if we extend for a couple days than if you start over again, or it might not be reasonable. Maybe it's more than a few days. Maybe it makes more sense for the parties to, like it's never going to happen. We're never going to be able to waive these conditions, and we gave it our best, and sorry, and we move on. But you have to build those types of relationships and rapport. And as an agent, you got to gather information to as much as you can. And you get it way better when you're having these direct conversations than doing it by text or by email.
Yeah, I'm going to give everybody a pro tip, number 3, and this is for listing agents. It just came to my mind, but I think it's really important, especially in this market. When you receive a low offer and you present it to your clients and they sign back and it's not accepted, do a reduction to the same amount that the sellers were willing to sign back. It's really important. Do it at the same time that the seller signs back the buyer's offer. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. Do a reduction in the price to the same price that the sellers were willing to give a sign back on the buyer's offer. Okay, we are seeing so many cancellations of listings because listings are not selling. There's nothing worse than prepping a house for sale, painting, fixing it up, staging it, changing light fixtures, getting windows cleaned, getting carpets cleaned, sending in cleaners, getting the grass cut, planting new flowers, only to find out that 3 months later, the house is not selling. How you prevent that from happening, and how you get, your number of listings, and your closing rates closed on your listings, is by utilizing this strategy. Every single time you get the seller to commit to signing back or accepting a lower price, you reduce the listing price to that amount right away. Why would you want to do this? Well, first of all, it creates more interest in the marketplace, in the house. Second of all, it sends a message to the buyer saying, hey, if the seller is communicating the fact that they're willing to do a $20,000 price reduction, not only to me, but to the whole marketplace, I might be in competition. I should speed up my reaction time and maybe accept this offer, or take it more seriously, right? Knowing that there's other people that have the same information that I have, that the seller is willing to accept less than their asking price.
Oh, that's great advice, great strategy. And it's, look, it's completely different advice and strategy, than we did. We're podcast 55. So a year ago, this time when we were on podcast 15 or 20 or whatever, we were back then having discussion. Like these weren't the 3 pro tips you were given back then, right? And that's why it's important to have support of experienced brokerage like you, people that have been through the different markets, and because you have to adjust, and you have to hold the hand of all your agents to get them adjust and how they're doing things. And we're adjusting in our world too, and how we're closing transactions and how we're dealing with our clients. It's a different market. So we all have to make these adjustments, because we can still do lots of business and be successful and do it all. We just have to do it differently. We have to draw on different skill sets. And these are really important conversations to have, important things for people to think about.
Absolutely. David, great doing these podcast number 55. We're getting so many positive messages from our agents or listening. I got a call from one of my agents the other day, asking me more questions about our rent to own podcast. So, I just want to really thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to and really participating. It's been so much fun recording these, and I look forward to many more episodes ahead of us. And want to encourage all our listeners, email us, phone us, get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. I'd love to do some Q&A and answer some of your questions as well.
Yeah, and let us know if there's topics or that you really want us to get into a little more, because that's always helpful, or to go back to and explain things further. That type of feedback is really helpful too. And I think I've said, David, from day one when we started these things, we haven't done one single podcast where I haven't learned something myself, from what you're telling me, or from what one of our guests are telling me, or just from having these discussions. I'm always learning, and I'm hearing things from you. And these 3 pro tips you came up with today, these are important things, and I'll have them in my head, and I'll be discussing this with other lawyers in my office and dealing with transactions. And this is what the agents out there are trying to do right now, and or what they should be trying to do. These are important things. So we're always evolving, always learning, and we hope this is a resource that people will draw on to get some of these discussion points and start thinking about it, and how you go about using a different level of different skill set to get transactions done in the summer of 2022, because you're going to need it, and for the fall as well. Lots of business out there. Just got to work at it a little bit differently. That's all.
Yeah, and if you're not busy, then the number one thing I strongly encourage you to do is invest in yourself. Listen to our podcast from the beginning. Lots of, even though the market has changed a lot, there's still tons of great information in those sessions. Take designation courses, go educate yourself, do your RICO continuing education courses, get your articling courses done, whatever it is. Keep investing in yourself if you're not busy.
Yeah, attend seminars and webinars.
Very important.
Draw on what other people, have discussions with other agents, and lawyers about what's going on, and how they're dealing with certain situations, and what the strategies are and everything. And there's always room to learn. Every market's a little bit different. We have to make adjustments. So this is no exception. So there's, we always talk about, these are challenges or are they opportunities, right? And it's a little of both, but make the most of these, be challenged and take advantage of the opportunities. It's there.
Absolutely. David, as always, this was great. Episode 55 completed. Can't wait to record podcast number 56 next week.
Okay, we'll see you then.
Stay safe, everybody. Enjoy the
Take
weather.
care.